out in the woods. Nobody can hear you scream.
My dad and I would occasionally go hunting together when I was a kid. I was 14 and my dad knew a guy who owned what seemed to be half of Georgia. I mean, the amount of property this guy owned was ridiculous. He let people hunt there, and if he trusted you, he'd let you camp out there for a couple of nights if you wanted. He'd always make sure we had a way to call for help before we did it though. I loved camping out there more than I did just going hunting for a few hours then coming home. I liked the woodsman feel of living out in the woods. We woke up early one morning and hiked into the woods. It was still dark when we got to our stand. We didn't see or hear anything, not even birds. I remember my dad commenting on it, and looking back, it should have been a sign. Frustrated, we pack up and look for a spot to camp, and we would set up again later that evening. My dad suggested we go deeper in to better our chances of seeing something, so that's what we did. We hiked for a few hours, found a clearing, set up a small camp, got settled and passed the time freaking ourselves out by talking about Bigfoot and other woodland creatures. We hike a ways away from camp, set up a blind and wait. Again, nothing. We get back and our tent has been pulled up and laid flat. Not in a neat way, but it's just kinda laying there. We thought it was just the wind or something, and we didn't put it upright and it collapsed. We didn't think much of it. Since we didn't see or even hear anything all day, we decided to leave the following day and try again later that week. We settle in for the night. I build a really small fire and just relax. Again, not even birds are making a sound. I remember thinking how odd it was to be this deep into the woods and only hear one or two birds the whole trip. Oh well, maybe we were making too much noise and scared everything off. We go to sleep soon after settling in. It's pitch black, middle of the night. I wake up for some reason, just to try to go back to sleep. I'm in that half asleep, half awake phase when I hear laughter. I kinda jolt awake, but don't hear it anymore, so I figured it was just a dream. I lay back down, and a few minutes later, I hear it again. It continues and gets pretty loud. I wake up again, but this time my dad is up too. He whispers and asked, "Did you hear that?" And this is when my heart dropped. He heard the laughing too. It wasn't a dream. We heard it again, but it was faint, and now that I'm actually awake, I am paying attention to it. It sounded kinda like several people laughing in unison. It wasn't cackling or hysterical laughter, but just kind of normal laughter. It didn't last, but maybe 5 or 6 long seconds. I have never felt that much fear before in my entire life. We didn't hear it anymore after that, but needless to say, we didn't get any sleep. We packed up as soon as the sun came up and GTFO'd. My dad was convinced someone followed us and was playing a prank. That's why we didn't see anything. He said while we were in the stand and blind, they were scaring all the wildlife off with their unmasked scent and being on the ground. He says this, but he didn't want to go back out there for over a month. When he did finally go back, he mentioned it to the guy who owned the property. He wouldn't let my dad hunt there anymore. Didn't say why either. My dad thinks he made the guy think that my dad was crazy or something. I guess it is possible for someone to have followed us there. They must have been legit ninjas though, because we went out before daybreak. Nobody but the owner was parked out there that morning. There were dead leaves and sticks everywhere, and when they decided to laugh, it came from different spots, and I never heard a footstep. Sorry if this wasn't really what you were looking for, but it's one of my best stories. Even if nobody I tell it believes me, I've got goosebumps. I'm a summer camp counselor. I work every summer for a camp for 5 weeks. One time we were backpacking to the tallest peak in my state. At night, me and a coworker/friend went on a night hike to get away from the kids. We laid down on a slope on a patch of grass to stargaze about a quarter mile from everyone else. As we were laying there, I heard the beautiful sound of water behind me. And I mean beautiful. I've never heard water running before and thought to myself, wow, this sounds so beautiful. All I could imagine was crisp, clear water, gracefully trickling by. I had this image stuck in my head. I had this sudden urge to go find it. Not just an urge, but a need to find the creek. Now behind us was a dense forest and brush, so it would have been hard to find it at night, but it sounded somewhat close to us. Me and my friend looked at each other. Without saying a word, I knew he was having the exact same thought as me. I said to myself, let's wait for 5 minutes, then we'll decide if we should check it out or not. It felt like a playful presence was trying to persuade us to go over there. Then I decided we should go check it out. And we stood up without saying anything to each other. It just sort of happened. As we were approaching the sound, it became quieter and quieter. We stopped, not knowing if we wanted to continue. As we stood there, the noise of trickling water became louder and louder, until it sounded like standing next to a river. I then said, let's come back tomorrow to find it. And we agreed to come back later. When I made that decision, the sound of the creek vanished, along with the urge to go. There was only silence. The presence I felt earlier suddenly became sinister. It was just this dark feeling of a presence, kind of similar to knowing when someone is watching you. I felt this fear slowly creeping up from my belly. We walked back to camp quickly, without speaking. Once we got back, we started talking about what just happened. My friend had the exact same urge to find the creek, and same internal battle in fighting the urge to go look for it. When we got back, it was like a trance had been lifted, and only then did we realize that what happened was not normal. We both could think clearer, like a fog had been lifted. That urge I felt did not feel like my own mind's urge. It's hard to explain, like an urge placed there because once the sound of the water stopped, the urge stopped. The next morning, we went back to the spot and went to the place where we heard the creek. We looked around, but we couldn't find any sort of creek or water. We later looked at some maps of where we were, and there are no creeks of water nearby. I'm scared to imagine what would have happened if we followed the sound of the water, because of the ominous presence we both felt. If I was by myself, I would have thought I was imagining it, but my friend thought, felt, and experienced everything I did. I don't know what it was, but it was eerie to say the least. What's strange is, neither of us said anything to each other once we heard the sound of water. And yet, we both made the decision to go look for it without asking each other, and both heard the sound of water becoming louder and quieter, even though there was nothing there. We both felt the sinister presence trying to lure us. I'm thankful we decided to go back later because all of it felt off. This happened to me when I was a teenager. I think it was the spring of 1998 when I was 14. My Boy Scout troop went hiking in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. I grew up in a very small town in Tennessee, and the boys in my troop were people I'd known my whole life, and we were all very close and knew each other very well, and trusted each other. We'd been hiking for 5 days or so, and it was miserable. It rained every day, and we were all exhausted and sore and hungry and covered with blisters. The adults realized we'd bitten off more than we could chew in trying to hike a 60-mile trail, especially with the awful weather. So we'd changed course and gotten off the trail to spend the night in a drive-in campground, the kind of place with hookups for RVs and picnic tables and fire pits, grills, central bathhouse with showers and toilets. It was in a very remote area. There may have been a few other small groups there, but if there were, we never interacted with or saw any of them. We were all filthy and wet and thus very excited about taking a hot shower. It was dark and we'd finished dinner. A group of 5 of my friends, including my friend Jeremy, headed up into the bathhouse, which was maybe a quarter-mile walk through the pitch-dark woods, up a worn-down gravel walking trail. I stayed behind to clean up, and after 10 or 15 minutes, followed them by myself. I had a weak little flashlight, the old incandescent kind, pre-LED. I remember the woods were totally silent. When I got about halfway to the bathhouse, I could see the light from it off in the distance in the woods. I heard a noise to my left and looked over and saw my friend Jeremy standing by an old-school manual water pump about 20 feet off the trail, the kind of pump where you raise and lower the handle to pump water up from a well. There was a strange light around him, like the moon had come out from behind the clouds. I was startled to see him there by himself in the woods off the trail. I asked him if he was already done with his shower. He seemed kind of sad and he said, "Yeah, it's all yours." I said okay, and didn't think much of it until I got to the bathhouse. When I walked in the door, my friends were all in there, and I heard Jeremy talking from in the shower. All the blood drained out of my head, and all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had to sit down before I passed out. My friends were freaked out and wanted to know what was wrong. I told them what had happened. They nervously made jokes about how I must have been smoking pot. This is long before any of us had experimented with any mind-altering substances. But I could tell they believed me. Like I said, we'd known each other forever, and knew when one of us was exaggerating or playing a joke. We all waited together until everyone was finished showering and brushing teeth and whatnot, and then walked back together in total silence. When we got to the spot I had seen whoever, he was gone without a trace. The water pump was there though. No one had noticed it before because it was a ways off the trail and obviously not in use. We got back to our campsite and went to bed, freaked out. I remember not sleeping much that night. In all the years since then, I've never been able to figure out what had happened. Was there a random teenage boy in the woods who looked just like my friend? Did I hallucinate it? Who's to say? I used to live on a mountain in northern New Jersey. It was very secluded and the entire surroundings of my house were a state park. There was a trail walking distance from my house that led to the peak of the mountain and, sadly, teens would often go up there to do drugs, spray paint the rocks, and whatever the hell else. One evening, this was when I was around 7 or 8, I was playing outside when this absolutely terrifying shriek rolled over the mountain. It was the voice of a woman. Although it was odd, I chalked it up to teens being teens at the peak. I then heard this screaming voice again. But this time, it was saying my name. It just kept saying it, in this blood-curdling scream. I became horrified, and my mum rushed over to see me and told me to get inside and stay there. That's really all I know from that night. It still puzzles me a bit. I just don't know if it was a coincidence or not. Mind you, the mountain I lived on was quite strange. I was literally right down the road from the Musconetcong River, home to the Musconetcong Mantis Man. There were also plenty of stories that circulated the mountain about a hiker who lost his life, and at night you could still see his lantern being carried through the woods. I have never experienced this. And then, right down the road from me, was also a small grave plot that held the bodies of a family that was murdered. With this information, I'm just looking for some opinions or insight on what happened that night. Still freaks me out a bit. Edit. Asked my brother if he remembered this because he was also ushering me inside along with my mum during that time, and he said he has zero recollection of this. But he did tell me that this sounded similar to an experience he had during the winter where he could hear a scream tear through the woods one evening. No clue if they're related. People were always coming through the trails around there, but it was mainly hunters in the winter. For people saying this could have been a bird or whatever, this sound had an echo that was so loud, it was the worst noise I've ever heard and is still trapped in my ears to this day. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you liked that video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already. A huge thank you to all the Reddit users who allowed me to use their stories. A link to each story will be in the description below. If you have a story you'd like to share on my channel, please send it to my email, which is also in the description below. As always, thank you all so much for your continued support. I really do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.